Backstory time for backstory. Okay, so I feel like I may have been a little bit overly harsh on my review of the last one in terms of how much I harped on the introduction of Agatha.
Who?
Yeah. No, we're done with that bit. And while I still kind of stand by what I said, it seemed like I was one of the only people who actually felt that as a criticism. So I may have overblown it a little bit. And I say that in an attempt to mitigate the fact that I'm probably gonna be largely complaining about this one too. Preface, it's not bad. It's perfectly fine. But it exemplifies something in especially serialized storytelling that can just frustrate me in general. And it sort of puts me in mind of when the series started at the beginning, where I can see what it's doing and respect what it's doing, don't think there's anything wrong with what it's doing, it just doesn't fully click with me. So let's start with Agatha herself. So we get a little bit of backstory on her, and the tying it to the Salem witch trials. Like, look, I know she's tied to Salem in the comics as well, but the MCU rewrites the history from the comics so much, I had really hoped they would ditch that, because the actual life lesson of Salem is not that there were witches, it's that people are psychotic and willing to put innocent people to death. So anytime any story goes, ooh, the real witches of Salem, I'm like, oh my god. That, like, it muddies the actual historical lesson to be taken from that freaking tragedy. I'm sorry, it was. So I honestly, at this point, and part of it's age and part of it's just having seen it too much, but I feel kind of gross whenever I see something just do straight up Salem had witches. No, it didn't. That's the point. Anyways, sorry, I'm already starting too negative. It's a minor detail. So we get Agatha's backstory. That said, I do like the inversion of the witch trial thing where, she's asked, are you a witch? But it isn't a matter of her being suspected of witchcraft by normal people. It's the other witches in her coven saying, you call yourself a witch? What the hell are you doing then? Like, that's a cool inversion. I don't want to shortchange that. That was actually kind of a neat little twist. And so she basically is just power hungry. And that's honestly about as much backstory as we need on her. She's into magic, into power, into accumulating it, and that's what drew her to Westview. So that kind of covers her in a nutshell. There's nothing here to indicate a tying of her to Mephisto, which is kind of a big part of her history in the comics, and also something that a lot of fans seem to have been expecting, because there's a lot of suspicion that Mephisto's going to factor into this, or will factor into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and they thought since Agatha is tied to him in the comics. Now, that's not to say that she can't be tied to him at a later date, because this only addresses her mother, not her father. But at least as far as what we're getting here, it doesn't seem like they're going to try and incorporate that stuff, which honestly is a good call, because if this thing gets too bogged down in introducing new elements when it's only got one more episode to go after this, I think only one anyways, then, it really is going to be a case of losing the thread of its own story in order to set up other stuff, which is, that's just Batman v Superman again, isn't it? So, moving along from that, I bash on that movie probably more than I need to. Anyways, so it was a little bit disappointing that what we get as far as fake Pietro, or Fietro, as she puts it, is that he's basically just completely her creation. There's no indication that she pulled him from some kind of multiverse. She does acknowledge that, like, she couldn't just necromance the actual Pietro, and that's why he looks different. But as of right now, it would just seem to indicate that it's a massive meta coincidence that the person that she picked, and the shape and the body and everything, just happened to be the same person as a Quicksilver from a completely different film franchise, which, the thing is, that's the kind of thing that I would have expected it to be, just a massive flipping coincidence that's fun for fans, like 5, 8 years ago. But at this point, knowing that Disney controls all these franchises, like, enough to be scary, but that's a whole other conversation, but also feeling like even in universe, it was built up quite a bit around him, that feels like a very haphazardly tossed off explanation. Again, though, much like Agatha and Mephisto, it does not close the door on the possibility of us finding out more about whoever the heck this guy is, who does not show up in here. So I'm sticking to my earlier prediction that he is going to actually work with Monica and turn on her. So I'm still holding to that prediction. All right. Another thing that this does seem to lock up is it does seem to it reminds us, and I think shows us in footage for the first time, that Wanda's parents, her father, is not Magneto in this reality, which I know some people had expected to somehow get interwoven or intermingled or retconned or multiversed into existence, like Pietro seemed to have been, or whatever, that was now going to be the case. But instead we have reiterated that her parents were just normal people in Sokovia. So I found it interesting that they kind of like drew a line under that, like, no, this was her life. Agatha does introduce the interesting idea that Wanda always had some kind of innate ability that just had lain dormant. Wanda didn't know she had it. She had no way to nurture it. Nothing was going to tap into it until the Mind Stone basically turned it on, which is an interesting notion, but then begs the question, so what was Pietro's deal that it just turned something on in him? Because if she was always going to be a witch, what was he supposed to be? A Olympic sprinter? I don't know. Again, it doesn't really matter, but that's kind of an interesting wrinkle as far as that goes. There's the little details, like finding out that she did grow up on these old-fashioned sitcoms and then still latched onto sitcoms, being at Avengers and was watching them with Vision. That's well built in terms of explaining why she went to that as kind of a backdrop and a default when creating Westview. Now, when I said I kind of have issues with this, but that doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with it, that has to do with the nature of this thing as a backstory episode. Backstory episodes, or overly long backstory sequences and flashbacks in movies even, they can lose me. Not completely, it's not like I completely tune out, but they tune out, but they do diminish my level of engagement because it's just backfilling and it's putting the forward momentum of the actual story on pause. Now, broadly speaking, television is a pretty decent format in which to indulge in backstories because you can section that off in its own contained episode rather than having to stop the forward momentum of the immediate thing, which is kind of what happens in film if a backstory scene or a flashback goes on for too long. But it's still a little bit of an issue for me, especially if the backstory we're getting is largely confirming what we either already knew or already suspected with just some tweaks. So in this case, really the only bits of new information we get firmly have to do with Agatha, and that's covered pretty quick, and the fact that Wanda did not actually steal Vision's body, but created him out of whole cloth when she got to Westview. Pretty much everything else that we see is stuff that has either been alluded to before or would have been the logical conclusion to come to already. And by that I mean the stuff with her growing up in Sokovia, the bit with her and Vision in the Avengers compound, the fact that it's her grief that basically just explodes out this whole spell and alters Westview. all of those are things that we either knew or was the logical thing to assume was the case. And so that means that we're spending the vast majority of this just only minorly tweaking, really, the things we already knew. And even the things that feel like they matter, and probably will. I mean, definitely given the mid-credit sequence regarding Vision's body, I hope you realize there were going to be spoilers in this. Otherwise, I'm sorry. Not sorry. Like penultimate episode of a series. What are you doing? Anyways, the whole thing with that, even though that is new information, that's like, what? 5 minutes worth of new information, and then the rest of it is just this slow-paced background information. So, I suppose the best way for me to illustrate why I just don't engage as well with this kind of flashback episode is to cite a couple of flashback episodes from a series that I recently finished watching that were masterful backstory flashback episodes. Those were from the Watchmen TV series. There were 2 flashback episodes in that, and they were both amazing. They were actually both the 2 best episodes of that entire season, because in both cases they provided information that we did not already know, like even a little bit. Nearly everything in those episodes was new information, not just sort of giving us a bigger, clearer picture of what we more or less already knew. Brand new information, and in both cases it heavily recontextualized nearly everything that it had gone on up to that point and changed your perspective on the things that it showed you when the main story picked up again. Here, my perspective hasn't really changed on anybody. You know, Agatha, she's power hungry. Okay, so now I know her motives, but I knew she was bad after the previous one, you know, at the reveal at the end of there. Hayward is sneaky and duplicitous, and we knew that from a couple of episodes ago. We just now know more specifics. Nothing here really all that heavily recontextualizes it, even though there are a couple of specific pieces of information that feel like they're going to be important, like the fact that the Vision in Westview is wholly created by Wanda, and now that, you know, they have reactivated Vision's body, but those take up so little of the runtime of this thing. The vast majority of it is spent neither moving the main story forward nor giving me much in the way of new information. And now, again, I don't want to paint that as a failing of the show. I don't think that means that this is a bad episode or that the show has lost its way. It just means that this is the kind of flashback, backstory stuff that I disconnect from a little bit, because it loses the forward momentum and doesn't replace it with anything. Because, I mean, by their nature, flashback episodes lose the forward momentum if you are doing a continuous serialized story. But if you're going to lose forward momentum, you need to give something else, usually in the form of a fair amount of brand new information about a character, events, or place. This has little tiny bits of new information, but again, it really doesn't feel like enough to justify this entire thing being a flashback episode. That said, it does primarily focus on Wanda as a character. It does not feel as much like trying to line up the logistics as it could have been. That's the kind of thing that I tend to criticize, say, some of Stephen Moffat's writing on Doctor Who, where there are some things, the Big Bang, the finale for Series 5 being the big one for me, where, like, this is just an exercise in tying up plot holes and it doesn't even really feel like there's a story here. This manages to avoid that pitfall by focusing primarily on Wanda's emotional state through all of this. And that was good. It did at least give it something to anchor the episode on. So, again, that's sort of why I'm saying I don't think it's necessarily bad, it just doesn't work for me, because I can look at it structurally and its placement in the thing and go, yeah, that's a pretty solid way to do it. I just kind of wish the relevant bits of information had been sprinkled across something that actually moved the whole story forward or gave me more dramatic information. I'm not sure there's more dramatic background information to be had than what they gave, so I guess I would have preferred the first thing that I said. Yeah, I'll be really curious to see how we wrap things up after this. But, yeah, I feel like WandaVision's, right now for me, it was strongest in the middle. Because it started, just with the straight-up parodies of old-style sitcoms, which were well done, but I don't particularly like that era of sitcoms, so lost me a little bit. And now, as it's sort of dropping the sitcom framing and way of filtering everything through, it's not quite as engaging. But when it was in the middle. When it was in the middle, it was striking the balance of those two things really, really well. And it's still good, just like it was still good when it started. It's just not... It may have passed its most engaging point for me already. But we'll see. It's got a finale to go. Whatever they do, as long as they continue to anchor it in the emotional journeys of the characters, like this episode did, I'm sure it'll still be good. So... I think that is pretty much it. Although, actually just naming her Scarlet Witch at the end felt, I don't know, cheesy and tacked on. I guess in the same way that the reveal of Agatha Harkness felt cheesy and tacked on at the end of the previous episode. But, I don't know, like, that's not a dun-dun-dun cut to credits moment. That's just her name in the comic. Whatever. Okay, WandaVision, episode 8. Haha, got it. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. That is how I pay my bills. And also, it's my birthday next month, so that would be a lovely present. Even if you're not able to do that, all the things I mentioned before, they help me out as well, but no pressure for that either, because take a relaxed attitude around here. So just come on back next time you need a break.